As most viewers are already familiar with these scenes from Jason Bermas and Dylan Avery's internet blockbuster, Loose Change 2nd Edition, in regards to the official United Airlines Flight 93 that departed Newark Airport, added with the theory that there was another plane or duplicate that it was shot down over Shanksville, rather than it being Flight 93 having crashed.
So if Flight 93 didn't go down in Shanksville, then where? You ready for this? Cleveland. At 11:43 on September 11th, WCPO, a local TV station in Cincinnati, Ohio, reported that 2 planes landed at Cleveland Hopkins Airport due to a bomb threat. United Airlines identified one of the planes as Flight 93. Are you confused? Well, it gets better. Check it out. At approximately 10 a.m., Cleveland Hopkins Airport was evacuated amidst rumors that a hijacked plane was going to land. Passengers had to leave, but couldn't drive. They had to walk or hitchhike. Buses weren't allowed to leave. People were sent home. According to Associated Press and local Ohio papers, one plane landed at approximately 10:45. But Delta Airlines confirmed that their plane, Delta 1989, landed in Cleveland at 10:10. Therefore, Flight 93 landed at Cleveland at approximately 10:45. Authorities searched Delta 1989 for over 2 hours, and passengers were questioned individually. The plane dealer reported that the plane was evacuated at 12:30. But the Akron Beacon reports that a plane was evacuated at 11:15, which would make that Flight 93. Mayor White reported that the plane had 200 passengers. But a passenger from Delta 1989 described 60 or so passengers. So at 11:15, 200 or so passengers were released from Flight 93. The passenger from Delta 1989 states that she was taken into FAA headquarters. But other reports say that passengers were brought into the NASA Glenn Research Center, located near the west end of the airport, which had already been evacuated. So, to sum up, Delta 1989 landed at 10:10, was evacuated at 12:30, almost 2.5 hours later, and 69 passengers were taken to FAA headquarters. Flight 93 landed at 10:45 and evacuated within a half hour. 200 or so passengers quickly taken to an empty NASA research center. Why did it take 140 minutes to evacuate 69 passengers when 200 were evacuated in a half hour? We can assume that the passengers from Delta 1989 are safe somewhere. The question remains, what happened to the 200 or so passengers from Flight 93? It's interesting to note that the combined total of all the passengers from all 4 flights is 198, or 243, depending on who you ask.
Well, we can do more than just assume Delta 1989 passengers are safe, and we can also provide an answer to Loose Change's mind-boggling question as to why it took over 2 hours to evacuate the plane, as well as the mix-up of 2 hijacked planes landing at Cleveland, and the insinuation that one of them was Flight 93 with 200 passengers, in this vivid assertion to equate the maximum load of passengers as being from within all 4 9/11 hijacked flights, evacuated into a NASA center at Cleveland Airport in an absurd plane swap theory in which other opportunists have crafted in their own competitive disinformation. But with the Loose Change saga still promoting this outlandish narrative as it still being half of Jason Bermas' endeavor, all Bermas had to simply do to avoid this mistake was to acknowledge all of History Channel's Grounded on 9/11.
By 9:20, with close to 4,500 flights still over or approaching North America, 2 planes over Cleveland Center are not responding to controller calls. Delta 1989 and United 93 will be listed as the 4th and 5th hijackings of the day unless controllers can re-establish communication.
Cleveland Center had several aircraft with which they did not have contact, whether they were in the middle of a frequency change, whether they were aircraft that weren't responding to calls, but at one point or another, there were several aircraft airborne that nobody was certain about.
When a pilot crosses from one controller's sector into another, he must switch to the next controller's frequency. During the process, it's not uncommon for dropouts to occur, briefly rendering the plane's radio silent. But on 9/11, dropouts on the 2 planes above Cleveland Center have far more sinister implications. At about 35,000 feet, United 93 and Delta 1989 cross paths. As United 93's radar signal momentarily blinks off, controllers hear someone scream on an errant frequency. But because the caller did not repeat or include a flight ID number, controllers cannot confirm from which plane the call is made.
There was confusion in watching the screen. Those planes crossed, and they lost sight of exactly which plane was which. So they had a tremendous number of challenges.
As the FAA and law enforcement started trying to profile, for lack of a better word, the types of aircraft that were involved, heavy jet departures from the East Coast, West Coast destinations, Cleveland Center had stewardship of several of those types of airplanes, including a Delta flight that they immediately suspected might be another potential hijack target.
Besides the planes that hit the towers, Delta 1989 is the only other 767 direct from Boston to LA, departing at 8 a.m. Following the unconfirmed distress call to Cleveland Center, the Delta pilot reports an unruly passenger to his company dispatchers. Suspicions of a hijacking are raised further when he requests an unscheduled landing at Cleveland Airport. The FBI and Cleveland SWAT bring in their heaviest equipment to confront any hijackers.
With the events going on throughout the country, obviously we knew we were under attack. What goes through your mind? At that time, things were happening so quickly, we just had to be focused on the mission we were given to come out to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport to handle a hijacked aircraft.
As you can see, one might be inclined to come to a better understanding why travelers were not allowed to be mobile in fleeing Cleveland Hopkins Airport. But just as minimal as History Channel's Grounded on 9/11 was in detailing the events that took place on Flight 23 at JFK Airport, it would be logical to conclude the same with unruly passengers on Delta Flight 1989, since in other reports like the Boston Herald, September 19, 2001, under the headline, War on Terrorism, 2 more planes possibly targeted on Day of Terror by Doug Hanchett and Cosmo Macera Jr. states that sources say at least 1 female passenger reported suspicious behavior by 2 male passengers. Sources say the woman told federal agents that 2 men appeared nervous as the flight sat on Logan's runway awaiting takeoff. She also said they repeatedly looked around the cabin and were restless early in the flight, as if they were looking for others but couldn't find them. But in a much more obscure article from the Massachusetts Wareham Courier on September 20th, 2001, written by Ruth Thompson, who interviewed a female passenger, Mary McFadden, documenting her story with her family who were originally planning to be on the doomed American Airlines Flight 11 that struck the North Tower, but at last minute she changed her family's flight to Delta 1989 for a lower fee. McFadden said in hindsight there were irregularities during her flight that may or may not have had a connection to the terrorism taking place on other planes. There was one man on our plane who would not get off his cell phone, she said. He was speaking in a low, urgent voice. Even when the stewardess went over to him to tell him to turn off the phone, he wouldn't. That's very odd. She also spoke of another passenger who said a man in the seat next to her spooked her because he kept turning his head and looking around throughout the entire flight. It was as though he was waiting for someone, McFadden said. Maybe they were going to hit our plane but the others didn't show up. I don't know. You think of things. While in flight, McFadden said they were not aware of anything unusual taking place in the world outside of their cabin. But then when we had to make an emergency landing, we were told there may be a bomb on the plane or it might be getting hijacked. But I gotta say, even with the advantage of these newspaper articles laid out, and just relying on History Channel's Grounded on 9/11, the truth of the matter with the incident of Delta 1989 is very telling of Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery's intentions, being that no correction or retraction regarding their bogus claim of Flight 93 landing in Cleveland Hopkins being a mix-up of Delta 1989's flight path near the confirmed dangers of Flight 93, there is no effort put out by them in apologizing or publicly revising, while Avery has continued his loose change saga without Burmis. But yet Burmis going solo with Fabled Enemies, he did not take the opportunity to at least add Delta 1989 with Flight 23 at JFK Airport to see for himself that there was something bigger going on September 11th, and more than likely, Burmis did not care to correct Avery in his newer versions of Loose Change. Basically, Burmis by himself omitting this additional incident with Delta 1989 from Grounded on 9/11 is cherry-picking, therefore absolutely dishonest and disingenuous. But as far as Boston Logan Airport goes, Delta 1989 isn't the only additional suspected flight. According to BBC News on September 18th, an article titled FBI Probes Attempted Fifth Hijack, the phrase that was used more than just being attributed to Flight 23 at JFK Airport, the article states that another suspected American Airlines plane out of Boston Logan, Flight 43, was an additional target. that the FBI were searching for a number of passengers who were due to fly on American Airlines Flight 43 from Boston, which was grounded due to a mechanical problem. It was scheduled at 8:10 a.m., departure from Boston. So now we're looking at the potential that there were 4 intended hijackings from Boston Logan. However, in the Daily Telegraph on September 20th, in an article titled, "More Planes May Have Been Targeted," FBI, up to 5 other flights on September 11th regarded by FBI as suspicious, that another United Airlines flight out of Logan, destined for San Francisco, was suspected by the FBI as a potential target for hijacking, but according to one of the passengers, Janice Burnett, that it may have been spared due to the fact that there were 30 U.S. Marines traveling on it, and that those guys were pretty visible in the boarding area, big and muscular, with their trademark haircuts and duffel bags. And also in the same Boston Herald article mentioned earlier regarding Delta 1989 from September 19th, meanwhile, a group of Boston area tourists headed to San Francisco on United Airlines Flight 163 earlier that fateful morning said that they were informed by airport security personnel in Iowa that their plane may have also been eyed by terrorists. "They told us we were targeted," said passenger Ruth Vana of Malden. That's how they worded it. According to Janice Burnett, a tour guide with Milford-based Scout Tours who was on the flight, security workers at the Des Moines airport, where the plane was forced to land, told passengers that the FBI discovered information on their flight in a car believed to belong to the terrorists. The car, a rental that was left at Logan, was towed away and impounded by the FBI last week. With these revelations in mind, we are looking at the basic scope that ultimately there could have been 5 intended hijacked targets of flights at Boston Logan, included with the 2 successful hijackings that struck the Twin Towers. And with one of those flights having not departed, and possibly other operatives having either backed out of the plan or possibly running into complications to carry out their missions, you have to ask yourself, what happened to the other suspects from these additional Logan flights?